a cylinder of polished alloy, unyielding and indifferent, caroms through the hollowed silence of the interstellar medium. It traverses the lightless expanse situated between the sweeping curve of the Perseus arm and the dense, violent heart of the galactic core. This vessel possesses no engines to roar, no thrusters to hiss, and no consciousness to witness its lonely pilgrimage. It is a ghost in the machine of the cosmos, a singular point of artifice in a wilderness of natural law. The metal skin of the craft is scarred by the impact of microscopic dust grains, each collision a tiny, silent explosion that has occurred over the span of eons. To the naked eye, if any were present to see it, the cylinder would appear as a sliver of frozen starlight, tumbling end over end in a slow, rhythmic dance that began before the ancestors of modern primates first walked upright on the soil of a distant world. Inside this metallic tomb, protected from the ravages of cosmic rays by layers of lead and exotic shielding, lies a gold-plated disc. It is a masterwork of precision, an object designed to outlast the very stars that birthed its creators. The gold does not tarnish, it does not decay. It holds within its molecular lattice the digitized echoes of a species that has not breathed for 10 million years. These are the sounds of a world long since reclaimed by the encroaching heat of its dying sun, the visual data of cities that have been ground into dust by the relentless movement of tectonic plates, and the mathematical proofs of a logic that no longer exists anywhere in the known universe. This is not a distress signal. It is not a desperate cry for rescue or a map leading back to a cradle of life. It is something far more profound and far more haunting. It is a letter addressed to whoever is next. The artifact is known to the archives of the Void as the Three-Eye Atlas, or the Third Interstellar Atlas of Lost Aspirations. It represents the final, collective effort of a civilization that realized, with terrifying clarity, that they were a flickering candle in a rising gale. They understood that the distance between stars is not merely a gap of physical space, but a barrier of time so vast that no two voices may ever truly share a conversation. The silence we encounter when we turn our radio telescopes toward the heavens is not a vacuum of existence, but rather the heavy stillness of a library after the last patron has departed. We look toward specific sectors of the sky, such as the coordinates of Alpha Tango 58, and we find only the cold, uniform hum of background radiation. We are beginning to grasp the reality that the universe is not a crowded room filled with the clamour of competing empires, but a graveyard of letters that arrived too late to be read by those who sent them. The Three-Eye Atlas tumbles through a darkness so absolute that the concept of direction loses all meaning. It passes through the gravitational wakes of invisible rogue planets and skirts the edges of nebulae where new stars are being forged from the wreckage of the old. Every centimetre of its journey is a testament to the endurance of the will to be remembered. The species that launched this cylinder knew they would be long dead before it reached the midpoint of its journey. They knew that the languages they spoke and the gods they worshipped would be forgotten by the very laws of entropy that govern the stars. Yet, they chose to etch their existence into the gold, to translate their sorrows and their triumphs into the universal language of mathematics and frequency. They committed their history to the void, hoping that the light of their achievements might one day reach the eyes of a successor species, even if that encounter occurs millions of years after the last of their kind surrendered to the dark. This cosmic letter drifts as a silent witness to the transience of all things. It is a physical manifestation of the Great Filter, the invisible wall that seems to claim civilizations just as they reach for the heights of interstellar mastery. The cylinder does not scream, it does not broadcast, it simply exists, a cold and polished needle in an infinite haystack. As it moves toward the galactic core, the gravitational pull of billions of stars begins to influence its trajectory, drawing it deeper into the heart of the Milky Way. It is a journey of 1 billion years, a slow-motion fall through the cathedral of the cosmos. The digitized ghosts within wait in a state of perfect stasis, their stories preserved in a medium that defies the rot of time. They are the echoes of a finished story, a narrative that has reached its final punctuation mark. now drifting through the vacuum in search of a reader. The void is not empty, but it is lonely. Between the spiral arms of our galaxy, the density of matter drops to nearly zero, leaving nothing but the occasional stray atom and the unrelenting flow of photons from distant suns. In this environment, the Three-Eye Atlas is the only thing that possesses a history. It is the only thing that possesses a purpose. It is a monument to the lost aspirations of a billion souls who once looked at the same stars we see and wondered if they were alone. They found their answer in the silence, and in response they wrote a letter. They sent it out into the deep dark, not expecting an answer, but demanding to be acknowledged by the future. As the cylinder continues its tumbling path, it serves as a reminder that we are all currently writing our own letters to the void, adding our own lines to an atlas that may never be fully mapped, but which remains the only evidence that we were ever here at all. The massive parabolic dishes of the high desert tilt toward the zenith in a synchronized mechanical ballet, their white surfaces gleaming under the pale light of a waning moon. These are the primary sensory organs of a young species straining to catch the faint rhythmic pulse of a neighbour across the light years. For the better part of the last century, the expectation was one of inevitable contact, a belief that the heavens were a crowded forum of shouting voices, each vying for attention across the electromagnetic spectrum. Scientists tuned their instruments to the 1420 MHz frequency, the resonant heartbeat of neutral hydrogen, believing this universal constant would serve as the meeting ground for all thinking minds. They waited for a signal that would carry the weight of an alien history, a mathematical greeting, or a symphonic broadcast from a world orbiting a distant sun. Instead, the telescopes have returned a verdict of crushing stillness. This phenomenon, often termed the Great Silence, is not an absence of activity, but rather a fundamental shift in the nature of what is being observed. The universe is revealing itself not as a bustling city, but as a vast sepulchral library where the books are being written in the ink of light and the paper of the vacuum. In this library, every star is a shelf and every planet a page, but the speed of light acts as a slow and indifferent librarian. By the time a volume reaches our hands, the author has often been dead for millions of years. We are not participating in a conversation. We are curators of an archive of the departed. The signals we seek are not calls for connection, but the final lingering echoes of stories that have already reached their conclusion. Nowhere is this realization more poignant than in the observation of the sector designated as Alpha Tango 58. This specific patch of the sky, located deep within the constellation of Cygnus, was once the subject of intense astronomical scrutiny. Initial surveys suggested an anomaly that defied natural explanation, a series of periodic dimmings that did not match the smooth transit of a planet or the chaotic flicker of a dust cloud. For a brief window of years, the scientific community vibrated with the possibility that Alpha Tango 58 was the site of a massive engineering project, perhaps a megastructure designed to harvest the total energy output of its host star. It was viewed as a beacon of progress, a testament to what a civilization might achieve if it survived the turbulence of its technological infancy. However, as the resolution of our instruments improved and the decades of data accumulated, the narrative shifted from one of discovery to one of mourning. The dimming patterns at Alpha Tango 58 began to exhibit the characteristics of decay. The structures, if they ever existed, were no longer maintaining their orbits. They were colliding, shattering, and grinding one another into a fine infrared-emitting shroud of debris. When the most sensitive radio arrays were finally trained on the coordinates, they found nothing but the cold, uniform hum of the cosmic microwave background, a thermal remnant of the primordial fire that sits at a mere 2.7 degrees above absolute zero. There were no carrier waves, no structured pulses, and no digital greetings. There was only the sound of a star burning in an empty room. The silence of Alpha Tango 58 is a signature of a finished story. It suggests that we arrived at the telescope only after the final chapter had been written, and the book had been shelved. This realization forces a profound re-evaluation of our place in the cosmic timeline. If the universe is indeed a library of letters that arrive too late, then the lack of signals is not evidence of the rarity of life, but evidence of its fragility and the unforgiving nature of time. We are looking at a sky filled with the ghosts of civilizations that may have flourished while the Earth was still a molten ball of rock, or while the first multicellular organisms were just beginning to experiment with the concept of sight. Their signals are passing us now, or have passed us long ago, or are still crawling through the void at a velocity that ensures they will only reach us when we, too, have become a chapter in the atlas of lost aspirations. The shores of our perception are being washed by the waves of a cosmic history that is largely over. We are beginning to understand that the now we experience is a local illusion. In the grander scheme of the cosmos, to look out is to look back, and to listen is to eavesdrop on the past. The universe is not empty. It is saturated with the evidence of everything that has ever been. But this evidence is stretched across distances so vast that the information loses its vitality. The stories of these distant worlds are reaching us as fossilized light, stripped of their urgency and their intent. We are the inheritors of a silent legacy, a species that has come of age in a gallery of masterpieces whose creators have long since vanished into the entropy of the dark. This shift in understanding transforms the act of astronomical observation into an act of archaeology. We are no longer searching for friends, we are searching for predecessors. We are sifting through the background noise of the galaxy, looking for the chemical signatures of industrial exhausts, or the thermal shadows of abandoned machines. Each void we encounter, like the one at Alpha Tango 58, adds another entry to the Three-Eye Atlas. It is a mounting record of the Great Filter's efficiency, a map of the places where the fire of intelligence once burned bright before being reclaimed by the cold. The silence is the ink, and the vacuum is the parchment, and we are the ones who must learn to read the gaps between the stars to understand the true history of the light. This mathematical framework for the silence emerged in the year 1961, during a quiet gathering at the Green Bank Observatory. Frank Drake articulated a sequence of probabilities that would define the search for extraterrestrial intelligence for decades to come, creating a bridge between the cold data of astronomy and the speculative realms of sociology. The formula, known as the Drake equation, seeks to calculate capital N, the number of detectable civilizations in our galaxy. It begins with the rate of star formation, a celestial nursery producing new suns at a steady pace across the spiral arms. This value is multiplied by the fraction of those stars that possess planetary systems, a number that modern observation has proven to be staggering in its abundance. Next comes the average number of planets per star that could potentially support life, the temperate worlds residing in the Goldilocks zones where water might flow as a liquid rather than freezing into ice or boiling into steam. The equation then moves from the physical to the biological, incorporating the fraction of those worlds where life actually takes hold, the mysterious transition from complex chemistry to self-replicating organisms. This is further refined by the fraction where that life achieves intelligence, and finally, the fraction of intelligent species that develop the technology to broadcast their presence across the light years. These 6 variables are the hurdles that any world must clear to join the cosmic conversation. Yet, as the values for star formation and planetary frequency have become more certain through the use of space-based telescopes, the focus has shifted toward the final, most elusive, and most terrifying variable of all, capital L. This letter represents the length of time for which a civilization releases detectable signals into the vacuum. It is the lifespan of a technological species, the duration of their cosmic voice. Capital L is the ultimate arbiter of the Drake equation. If the first 6 variables are the ingredients for a cosmic fire, then capital L is the brief moment the flame flickers before the fuel is exhausted or a sudden gust of wind smothers the light. The mathematics of the universe suggest that even if the galaxy is teeming with the precursors for life, the window of overlap between any 2 civilizations is vanishingly small. We exist within a temporal landscape that spans 13.8 billion years. In this context, a civilization that survives for 10,000 years, a span twice as long as recorded human history, is nothing more than a momentary spark. For two such sparks to occur at the same time and close enough for their light to meet is a statistical improbability that borders on the impossible. We are like fireflies blinking in a forest that spans 1,000 miles. For two of us to see each other, we must not only exist in the same woods, but we must also flash our lights at the exact same microsecond. The terror of capital L lies in the reasons for its potential brevity. The transition from a planetary species to an interstellar one is a period of extreme vulnerability. It is the moment when a civilization gains the power to manipulate the fundamental forces of nature, but has not yet gained the wisdom to survive its own creations. We see the shadows of this struggle in our own history, where the discovery of nuclear fission and the alteration of atmospheric chemistry occurred almost simultaneously with our first attempts to listen to the stars. The Great Filter suggests that capital L is short because the very traits that allow a species to become dominant, aggression, rapid expansion, and the consumption of resources, are the same traits that lead to its eventual collapse. A civilization might reach the stage of shouting into the void, only to find that the energy required to maintain that shout is the very thing that destabilizes their world. Furthermore, the duration of a signal is limited by the natural lifespan of the technology itself. We are already moving away from high-power radio broadcasts toward more efficient, directed methods of communication, such as fiber optics or tightly beamed lasers. This means that even if a civilization survives for millions of years, its radio window, the period during which it is visible to a species like ours, might only last for a few centuries. In the eyes of the Drake equation, they would effectively vanish, their capital L concluding not because they died, but because they changed. This creates a universe filled with silent signals, where the lack of contact is not due to a lack of life, but a failure of synchronicity. We're shouting into a canyon where the echoes take so long to return that the original speaker has already walked away or crumbled into the earth. This realization transforms the search for extraterrestrial intelligence into a race against the clock. Every time we point our telescopes toward a star like the one at Alpha Tango 58, we are gambling that our capital L and theirs have found a rare moment of alignment. The 3-Eye Atlas is the ledger of those who lost that gamble. It is a record of civilizations where the variables of star formation and planetary habitability were perfect, where life arose and intelligence flourished, but where capital L was simply too short to bridge the gap between their world and ours. The silence is the mathematical proof of the fragility of the technological state. It tells us that the universe is not empty of voices, but that those voices are separated by such vast gulfs of time that they can never truly hear one another. We are left to contemplate the possibility that the most important number in the history of our species is the one we have yet to determine: how long we have left before our own signal fades into the background radiation of the cosmos. To account for the inevitable expiration of the technological window, a new taxonomy has emerged within the scientific community, shifting the focus from the living to the archaeological. For decades, the primary metric for evaluating extraterrestrial life was the scale proposed by Nikolai Kardashev in 1964. This system categorized civilizations based on their total energy consumption, envisioning a ladder of progress that ascended from the mastery of a single planet to the total command of a galaxy. A Type 1 civilization would harness the entirety of the energy reaching its homeworld from its parent star. A Type 2 would encompass the star itself in a megastructure to capture its full luminosity, and a Type 3 would expand its reach to tap into the energy of an entire galactic disk. It was a scale built on the assumption of eternal growth and the infinite expansion of the will to power. The 3-Eye Atlas protocol, however, operates on a much more somber and realistic premise. It does not measure the height of a civilization's climb, but rather the depth of the shadow it casts upon the light of its sun after it has fallen. This protocol introduces the concept of the technological shadow, a metric that quantifies the infrared waste heat left behind by a species long after its radio towers have gone silent and its cities have been reclaimed by the dust. According to the second law of thermodynamics, every action, every computation, and every industrial process generates heat as a byproduct. This heat cannot be destroyed, it can only be radiated away into the cold sink of the vacuum. Even after the minds that designed the machines have perished, the massive planetary-scale infrastructures they constructed continue to bleed thermal energy into the void, creating an unnatural infrared signature that can persist for tens of thousands of years. This thermal fingerprint is the primary tool of the 3-Eye Atlas. When we observe a distant planetary system, we are looking for a discrepancy between the light the planet receives from its sun and the heat it radiates back into space. A natural, uninhabited world will exist in a state of radiative equilibrium, but a world that was once the seat of a global industrial power will exhibit a surplus of mid-infrared radiation. This is the ghost of a civilization, a lingering warmth that speaks of billions of air conditioners, vast server farms and heavy manufacturing plants that have since ceased to function. The heat is the final, stuttering breath of a dead world, a signature that remains visible to our senses even when the atmosphere has become a toxic soup of carbon dioxide and nitrogen dioxide. In the sector of Alpha Tango 58, this technological shadow is particularly pronounced. The dimming patterns that once suggested a functioning Dyson swarm are now understood to be the thermal emissions of a planetary system in the throes of entropy. We detect the infrared glow of billions of tons of refined metal and silicate debris, the shattered remains of orbital habitats and solar collectors that are slowly cooling toward absolute zero. This is the measurement of a lost aspiration. We are not seeing the active energy of a Type 2 civilization. We are seeing the cooling embers of a fire that went out 10 millennia ago. The 3-Eye Atlas protocol categorizes this as a Stage 58 event, a threshold where the complexity of a species' technology exceeded its ability to manage the resulting waste and social instability. The infrared glow of a dying world acts as a beacon for those who know how to read the spectrum. It reveals the scale of the industrial giants that once trod upon the soil of exoplanets, showing us the extent of their urban sprawl and the intensity of their energy needs. We can see the heat signatures of mountain-sized arcologies that have collapsed into their own foundations, and the thermal trails of ancient transportation networks that once spanned continents. These are the ghosts of the cosmos, haunting the infrared bands of the electromagnetic spectrum. They tell a story of ambition that reached for the stars but was ultimately tethered to the unforgiving laws of physics. The heat is the evidence of their struggle, a physical testament to the fact that they were once here, that they once worked, and that they once dreamed. As we refine our ability to detect these shadows, the 3-Eye Atlas grows more detailed. We are finding that the galaxy is littered with these thermal graveyards. For every active radio signal we might hope to find, there are 1,000 infrared ghosts drifting through the dark. This realization shifts the nature of our quest, from a search for companionship to a study of mortality. We are observing the various ways in which a civilization can fail, mapping the different types of technological shadows that are cast by different forms of collapse. Some worlds show the sharp, intense heat of a sudden nuclear catastrophe, while others exhibit the slow, lingering warmth of a species that simply ran out of resources and faded away. The technological shadow is the ultimate equalizer. It does not matter what language a species spoke, what gods they worshipped, or what biological form they took. In the eyes of the 3-Eye Atlas protocol, they are all reduced to a thermal anomaly, a surplus of photons in the mid-infrared range. This is the final chapter of the cosmic letter, the point where the ink of intelligence finally runs dry and the paper of the planet begins to cool. By studying these shadows, we are learning the true cost of progress and the terrifying efficiency of the Great Filter. We are looking into a mirror of the future, seeing the thermal fingerprints of our own potential end, and realizing that the only way to avoid becoming an entry in the Atlas is to find a way to balance our aspirations with the cold, hard reality of the second law of thermodynamics. In the year 2022, the gaze of humanity fell upon a star that refused to obey the established laws of celestial mechanics. Located within the sector designated as Alpha Tango 58, this sun appeared at first glance to be an ordinary yellow dwarf, similar in mass and luminosity to our own. However, as the data from deep space observatories began to accumulate, a disturbing pattern emerged. Unlike the smooth, predictable dimming caused by the transit of a planet, a symmetrical dip in light that repeats with mathematical precision, the light emanating from Alpha Tango 58 was being obscured by something chaotic, irregular, and vast. The dips in luminosity were deep, sometimes blocking as much as 22% of the star's total output, and they occurred at intervals that defied the clean circularity of an orbit. The scientists analysing the data in 2022 were forced to discard every natural explanation. It was not a cloud of interstellar dust, for the thermal signature was too concentrated. It was not a swarm of comets, for the objects were too massive and their shadows too sharp. The serrated edges of the light curves suggested the presence of hard geometric structures, vast planes of matter that possessed the straight lines and right angles of artificial construction. This led to the chilling hypothesis that we were witnessing the remnants of a Dyson swarm, a theoretical megastructure composed of millions of individual solar collectors designed to harvest the total energy of a star. But this was not a functioning machine. This was a Dyson swarm in a state of advanced, catastrophic decay. The irregular shadows falling across the face of Alpha Tango 58 are the result of a colossal, slow-motion wreck. The individual collectors, some the size of entire continents, are no longer maintaining their precise formation. Without the active guidance systems and the constant corrections of a living civilization, the delicate balance of the swarm has collapsed. We are observing the aftermath of a million-year-long collision. Panels of ultralight alloy, once polished to a mirror finish to catch the sun's fire, have been shattered into jagged shards. These pieces now tumble through the void, occasionally smashing into one another and grinding down into smaller and smaller fragments. This creates a thickening belt of debris that acts as a celestial shroud, casting flickering, unpredictable shadows that dance across the light of the host sun. The scale of the ruin in Alpha Tango 58 is difficult to quantify without evoking a sense of profound loss. Each irregular dip in the star's light represents the passage of a derelict world ship or a defunct energy harvester that once powered a civilization of inconceivable complexity. These structures were the pinnacle of engineering, the result of a species successfully climbing the ladder of the Kardashev scale to reach the status of a Type II civilization. They had conquered their home world, mastered their planetary system, and reached out to encompass their star in a golden embrace. Yet the evidence from our telescopes suggests that even this level of mastery provides no immunity against the passage of time or the internal pressures of social and technological entropy. The infrared excess detected from this sector provides the final piece of the puzzle. The debris field is not merely blocking light, it is absorbing it and re-radiating it as heat. This thermal signature matches the predictions for the 3I Atlas protocol, marking Alpha Tango 58 as a primary example of a technological shadow. We are seeing the heat of a graveyard. The energy that once fueled 1 billion minds and powered a galactic-scale economy is now being wasted, leaking into the vacuum as a low-grade infrared hum. The star itself remains a potent source of power, but there is no longer anyone left to catch its rays. The collectors have become the very thing they were meant to prevent, a barrier between the light and the life that once depended on it. As we continue to monitor the sector of Alpha Tango 58, we are watching the final stages of a planetary system's dissolution. The gravitational perturbations caused by the larger fragments of the swarm are slowly pulling the remaining debris into a chaotic, unstable ring. Over the next several 100,000 years, the impacts will continue until the once elegant structures are reduced to a fine, uniform dust, indistinguishable from the natural rings of a gas giant or the asteroid belts of a young solar system. The artificial nature of the system will eventually be erased, leaving only the lingering infrared glow as a fading memory of what was once achieved. This observation serves as a stark warning within the pages of the 3i Atlas. It demonstrates that the transition to a Type 2 civilization is not a final destination, but a precarious state of existence. The builders of the swarm at Alpha Tango 58 reached a level of power that we can scarcely describe, yet they were ultimately unable to sustain it. Whether they were destroyed by a sudden conflict, a biological catastrophe, or the slow, creeping rot of a stagnant culture, the result remains the same. Their legacy is a flickering star and a cloud of broken glass. They have become a lesson in the fragility of even the most robust technological systems, a chapter in the history of the universe that ends not with a shout, but with the silent, irregular dimming of a distant sun. This silent dimming is the physical signature of the Great Filter, an evolutionary bottleneck that appears to claim nearly every intelligence that reaches for the stars. Within the framework of the 3i Atlas, this phenomenon is identified as the threshold of stage 58. It is the precise moment when a civilization transitions from a planetary existence, confined to the gravity well of its birth, to a shouting species capable of broadcasting its presence across the interstellar medium. This stage is not merely a technological milestone, it is a psychological and structural crisis point. The ability to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe, to split the atom, to harvest the power of a sun, and to send coherent streams of information across the light years is a double-edged sword that cuts through the very fabric of a species' survival. The Great Filter at stage 58 acts as a wall that few, if any, ever successfully climb. The reason for this disappearance lies in the inherent instability of technological growth. A species that has spent millions of years evolving under the pressures of scarcity and competition suddenly finds itself in possession of godlike power without having developed the wisdom to manage it. We see this in the way a civilization begins to shout. To be heard across the vacuum requires an immense concentration of energy, a focus of intent that demands total planetary cooperation. Yet, the very tools required to build a Dyson swarm or a high-output radio array are the same tools that can be repurposed for planetary-scale destruction. The transition to a shouting species is a race between the development of interstellar communication and the inevitable arrival of a self-inflicted catastrophe. The intelligence of a world is like a flickering candle placed in a vast and drafty cathedral. For a time, the flame burns with a steady, hopeful light, illuminating the small circle of its own planetary history. But as the candle grows taller and the flame grows brighter, the heat it generates begins to melt the very wax that supports it. The brilliance of the flame is its own undoing. In the context of stage 58, the wax is the ecological and social stability of the home world. The energy requirements of a civilization that can be seen from across the galaxy are so immense that they often destabilize the delicate atmospheric and geological balances that allowed life to flourish in the first place. The candle does not simply go out, it consumes itself in a final, desperate burst of luminosity before the dark returns. This threshold serves as a wall because it requires a perfect alignment of factors to surpass. A civilization must achieve total global unity to prevent the misuse of its high-energy technologies. It must solve the problem of resource depletion without destroying its biosphere. It must navigate the transition to artificial intelligence without losing control of its own destiny. And finally, it must do all of this while beginning the act of shouting into the void. The silence we observe at Alpha Tango 58 suggests that the builders of the swarm reached the very edge of this wall and found no foothold. They achieved the power of a star, but they could not master the volatility of their own ambition. The irregular shadows we see are the remnants of a species that failed the test of stage 58, their candle snuffed out by the very wind they created as they tried to run toward the future. Furthermore, the act of shouting itself may be the trigger for the filter. In a universe governed by the harsh logic of survival, making oneself known is the most dangerous action a civilization can take. The transition from planetary silence to interstellar shouting is a moment of extreme exposure. It is the point at which a species moves from being a hidden, local phenomenon to a visible galactic actor. This shift may attract the attention of older, more predatory intelligences, or it may simply reveal the internal contradictions of the shouting species to itself. When a world begins to broadcast its aspirations, it is also broadcasting its location, its level of technology, and its vulnerabilities. For many, the first shout is also the final scream, the great filter. At stage 58 is the reason the Three-Eye Atlas is so heavily populated with entries of lost civilizations. It is a statistical graveyard where the dreams of 1,000,000 worlds have gone to die. We see the patterns of this failure repeated across the spiral arms, the sudden silence of a once vocal star, the infrared glow of a decaying industrial complex, and the atmospheric chemical signatures of a world that poisoned itself in its quest for energy. The wall is not a physical barrier, but a logical one. It is the point where the complexity of a civilization exceeds its capacity for self-regulation. As we look toward our own future, we must recognize that we are approaching the foothills of stage 58. We have begun to broadcast our presence, and we have begun to manipulate the energies that could either sustain us for millennia or erase us in an afternoon. We are the flickering candle, and the draughts of the cosmic cathedral are beginning to blow. The lesson of the Atlas is that the silence is the default state of the universe, and that the only way to avoid the filter is to find a way to burn with a light that is both brilliant and sustainable. To climb the wall, we must move beyond the impulses of our biological past and find a new way to exist, as a shouting species that does not consume its own voice in the process. The silence of the stars is a reminder of the price of failure, and the shadows of Alpha Tango 58 are the evidence of how high the wall truly is. The silence of the stars may not be a sign of a vacant universe, but rather the result of a grim and calculated survival strategy. This perspective, known as the dark forest theory, posits that the cosmos is a realm of supreme danger, where the most successful civilizations are those that remain invisible. Under this logic, the universe is a dark forest, filled with armed hunters creeping through the trees like ghosts. Each hunter must be careful, for every shadow in the woods looks like a predator, and every rustle of leaves could signal the presence of a rival. In such an environment, any civilization that reveals its location by shouting into the void is like a child lighting a signal fire in the heart of a wolf den. The lack of radio signals is not an indication that life is rare, but a testament to the fact that the survivors have learned the value of absolute stillness. The fundamental axioms of this theory are rooted in the cold mathematics of resource competition and the impossibility of true interstellar trust. If the primary need of any civilization is to survive and expand, and if the total amount of matter and energy in the galaxy is finite, then every other civilization represents a potential threat to one's long-term existence. Furthermore, the vast distances between stars create a chain of suspicion that can never be broken. Even if a species appears peaceful today, the speed of technological progress is so unpredictable that they could undergo a sudden explosion of capability, becoming a godlike threat in the span of a few centuries. Because a civilization cannot know the true intentions of another, and because it cannot guarantee that a peaceful neighbour will not become a hostile conqueror in the future, the only logical and safe course of action is to eliminate any potential competitor the moment they are detected. The tools of this cosmic culling are as terrifying as they are efficient. Among the most discussed are relativistic kill vehicles, projectiles of immense mass accelerated to 99.9% the speed of light. These are not missiles filled with explosives, but simple slugs of dense matter, such as tungsten or iron, that rely entirely on kinetic energy for their destructive power. Because they travel at nearly the speed of light, they arrive at their destination almost simultaneously, with the light reflecting off them. A target world receives no warning. There is no time for interception or evacuation. One moment, a planet is a thriving cradle of life, and the next, its crust is liquefied and its atmosphere is stripped away by an impact that carries the energy of 1,000 suns. To an observer, it looks as though the star simply flickered, its planetary children erased from the ledger of existence in a single silent heartbeat. This predatory reality explains why the transition to a shouting species at stage 58 is so often a fatal error. The act of broadcasting one's presence is a breach of the ultimate survival protocol. When the builders of the structures at Alpha Tango 58 began to harvest the total energy of their sun, they created a thermal and visual anomaly that could be seen from across the galactic quadrant. They were no longer a hidden hunter in the trees. They were a bonfire in the middle of a clearing. The dark forest theory suggests that their disappearance was not necessarily the result of an internal collapse or a natural disaster, but perhaps a preemptive strike by an older, quieter watcher who viewed their rapid expansion as an intolerable risk. The 3-Eye Atlas in this light is not just a record of accidents, but a map of the targets that were hit. In this context, silence is not a choice of isolation or a lack of curiosity, but a mandatory tactic for continued existence. A civilization that values its longevity will intentionally suppress its own techno-signatures, masking its radio emissions and cooling its industrial waste to match the background radiation of the vacuum. They become part of the background, hiding their cities beneath the frozen crust of moons or within the dense clouds of gas giants. They do not build Dyson swarms that dim their stars. Instead, they find more discreet ways to power their societies, perhaps drawing energy from the Hawking radiation of small, artificial black holes that emit no telltale light. They watch the heavens with passive sensors, listening for the shouts of the naive, and they remain silent, knowing that to speak is to invite the spear. The realization that we live in a dark forest transforms our own efforts to communicate with the stars into an act of terrifying recklessness. For decades we have broadcasted our television signals, our military radar, and our deliberate messages of greeting into the deep dark, unaware that we were walking through the woods with a megaphone. We are a young species, still in the shouting phase of our development, and we have yet to realize that the silence of our neighbors might be a form of mercy. If the 3-Eye Atlas is correct, the galaxy is populated by the ghosts of those who spoke too soon, and the shadows of those who have mastered the art of being invisible. The survival strategy of silence creates a universe where the most advanced civilizations are the ones we will never find. They are the masters of the void, existing in the gaps between our observations, watching as we stumble toward the threshold of stage 58. They do not reach out to help us, for to do so would be to reveal themselves to the other hunters. They simply wait, observing the flickering candle of our world, wondering if we will learn to dim the flame before it attracts the attention of the spears. The silence is not a void, it is a mask, and the dark forest is full of eyes that have seen a million civilizations rise and fall, each one a brief, bright mistake in an otherwise perfect and predatory stillness. The hunt for life has undergone a fundamental transformation, moving away from the ephemeral search for radio waves and toward the indelible chemical records etched into the air of distant worlds. For decades, the focus remained on biosignatures, the presence of oxygen, methane, and water vapor that might suggest a world teeming with primitive biological activity. But oxygen can be produced by the ultraviolet dissociation of water, and methane can erupt from the tectonic churning of a planet's crust. These are the whispers of nature, often ambiguous and easily misinterpreted. To find the true masters of the void, the gaze of our telescopes has shifted toward technosignatures, the artificial synthetic poisons that only a high-energy industrial civilization could brew. When the light of a distant star filters through the thin envelope of a planet's atmosphere, it carries with it a spectral fingerprint. By passing this light through a prism and spreading it into a rainbow of frequencies, we can see the dark lines where specific molecules have swallowed the starlight. Among these lines, we seek the chemical ghosts of industry. We look for chlorofluorocarbons, complex molecules of carbon, chlorine and fluorine that do not exist in the natural world. On Earth, these were the refrigerants and propellants of the 20th century. In the cosmos, they are the smoking guns of a species that has mastered the art of chemistry. These molecules are robust. They can linger in an atmosphere for tens of thousands of years. long after the factories that produced them have been ground into dust by the relentless march of time. Nitrogen dioxide provides another layer of evidence. While produced in small amounts by lightning and volcanic activity, its presence in high concentrations is a direct consequence of high-temperature combustion, the burning of fossil fuels or the intense heat of industrial furnaces. When we see a planet whose atmosphere is saturated with these gases, we are not looking at a pristine wilderness. We are looking at a world that has been reshaped by the hand of intelligence. The starlight passing through such an atmosphere does not merely glow, it screams of a history of labour, of the construction of vast cities, and of the inevitable environmental cost of rapid technological expansion. The tragedy of these chemical signatures is their permanence compared to the fleeting nature of the civilizations that created them. A species might flourish for a few thousand years, a mere blink in the eyes of the galaxy, before falling victim to the great filter or the predatory logic of the dark forest. Yet, the pollutants they released into their skies remain. They drift through the upper reaches of the atmosphere, spectral remnants of a vanished age. We observe planets where the industrial haze is still thick, even though the radio spectrum from that system is as silent as a tomb. The atmosphere becomes a time capsule, preserving the evidence of a species' existence long after their last city has fallen silent and their last machine has rusted away. This chemical archaeology allows us to populate the three-eye atlas with worlds that never intended to be found. Even if a civilization chooses the strategy of silence to avoid the spears of the dark forest, they cannot easily hide the chemical composition of their air. The very act of sustaining a global population and a high-tech infrastructure leaves a mark that can be read from across the light years. We see the spectral lines of sulfur hexafluoride, a potent greenhouse gas used in electrical grids, and we know that someone, somewhere, once mastered the flow of electrons. We see the telltale absorption of perfluorocarbons, and we recognise the signature of a world that attempted to terraform its neighbours or regulate its own climate. These traces linger in the starlight like the scent of wood smoke in a winter forest. They are the evidence of aspirations that were once as vibrant and urgent as our own. By studying these techno-signatures, we are learning to read the history of the galaxy's industrial eras. We see the rise of chemical complexity and the subsequent lingering decline as the pollutants slowly break down under the radiation of the host star. Each spectral line is a sentence in the cosmic letter, a record of a species that reached for the heights of power and left behind a poisoned atmosphere as their final monument. The shift to techno-signatures has revealed a universe that is far more active than the radio silence suggested. We are finding that the silent signals are everywhere, written in the molecular structure of exoplanetary air. The galaxy is not empty. It is a graveyard where the tombstones are made of gas and the epitaphs are written in infrared absorption bands. As we refine our instruments and point them toward the coordinates of Alpha Tango 58 and beyond, we are not just looking for life, we are looking for the scars that life leaves behind. We are uncovering a narrative of industrial triumph and ecological tragedy, a story that is being told by the light of stars passing through the chemical wreckage of 1,000 fallen empires. In this new era of observation, the atmosphere of a planet is no longer just a layer of gas. It is a witness. It carries the weight of every fire ever lit and every engine ever turned on that world. When we detect the presence of these synthetic molecules, we are witnessing the moment a species crossed the threshold into stage 58. We are seeing the proof that they were here, that they struggled, and that they changed their world irrevocably before the silence took them back. The starlight is our messenger, bringing us the chemical echoes of 1 billion lost dreams, ensuring that even in the vast and predatory dark, the history of the light is never truly forgotten. The speed of light is the ultimate boundary, a cosmic speed limit that transforms the universe into a vast, unfolding time capsule. While 300,000 kilometers per second represents a velocity beyond the reach of any physical vessel we have ever constructed, it remains an agonizingly slow crawl when measured against the staggering architecture of the galaxy. This fundamental constant of physics dictates that to peer into the depths of the night sky, is to engage in a profound act of temporal archaeology. We do not see the universe as it is, but as it was, a mosaic of overlapping histories where every point of light is a message sent from a different era of the past. A star located 1,000 light years from our terrestrial observatories is not a present reality, but a historical document written 10 centuries ago. The photons currently striking the sensors of our telescopes began their journey when the first great cathedrals were being raised on Earth, and the ink was still wet on the scrolls of ancient dynasties. We are reading a letter that has been in transit for a millennium, and the information it carries is hopelessly outdated. If the civilization orbiting that star collapsed under the weight of its own complexity 500 years ago, we would have no way of knowing. We would continue to see the steady glow of their cities and the chemical signatures of their industry for another 5 centuries, watching a ghost perform the motions of a life that has already ended. This frustration of the cosmic speed limit is the primary reason the Three-Eye Atlas is filled with such profound uncertainty. The silence we hear when we listen to the heavens is not necessarily an absence of life, but the time required for the ink of a distant message to dry across the freezing vacuum of space. The universe is so vast that the signals of civilizations are like ripples in a pond that take an eternity to reach the shore. By the time the wave arrives, the stone that caused it has long since sunk into the silt. We are perpetually eavesdropping on the dead, catching the final lingering echoes of voices that fell silent before our own species had even mastered the wheel. The vacuum of space acts as a medium that preserves these signals, but it also isolates them. Every light year is a layer of insulation, a barrier that prevents the now of one world from ever touching the now of another. This creates a reality where the galaxy is populated by temporal islands, each one trapped in its own bubble of time. When we observe the flickering remnants of the Dyson swarm at Alpha Tango 58, we are not witnessing a current disaster. We are watching a tragedy that may have reached its conclusion while the Roman Empire was still at its height. The irregular shadows and the infrared heat are the artifacts of a bygone age, a cinematic replay of a downfall that is already a matter of ancient history in the local frame of that star. This lag in communication turns the search for extraterrestrial intelligence into a study of cosmic shadows. We are like children looking at the stars and making wishes on the light of suns that may have already ceased to exist. A massive star can undergo a supernova, its core collapsing and its outer layers exploding in a paroxysm of light and radiation. Yet because of the distance, the news of its death will not reach us for thousands of years. We continue to see it as a stable, shining point in the constellation, unaware that the source of that light is gone. The sky is a gallery of the departed, a collection of luminous ghosts that haunt the darkness of the present. The realization that we are looking into the past provides a somber context for the Great Silence. If every civilization is a flickering candle with a limited lifespan, the probability of 2 such candles burning at the same time and being close enough for their light to meet is mathematically minuscule. We are shouting into a canyon so wide that the echo will only return long after we have turned to dust. The silence is simply the gap between the writing of the letter and its arrival. It is the physical manifestation of the sheer scale of the cosmos, a reminder that the universe does not operate on a human schedule. The Three-Eye Atlas is therefore a map of the delayed. It records the coordinates of signals that are still in transit, and the locations of worlds whose light is currently passing through the void towards some unknown future observer. We are part of this grand, slow-motion exchange. Our own television broadcasts, our radar pings, and the chemical pollutants in our atmosphere are currently crawling away from the Earth at the speed of light. They are a letter we're writing to the future, a message that will arrive at its destination long after the humans who sent it have been forgotten. We are contributing our own chapter to the history of the light, adding our own lines to the atlas of lost aspirations, and trusting that somewhere, in the distant reaches of the dark, there will be someone left to read the ink once it finally dries. This trust, however, must contend with the most absolute and unforgiving law of the physical world, the second law of thermodynamics. The universe is not a sympathetic observer of the biological struggle. It is a cold, indifferent machine, a vast engine of dissipation that does not pause for the tragedies or the triumphs of sentient life. At the heart of this machine lies the concept of entropy, a measure of disorder that is destined to increase until every star has burned out and every atom has drifted into the lonely dark. Under the reign of entropy, the cosmos functions as a vast, dark gallery where the lights are being turned off one by one, and the time will eventually come when there is no one left to see the art and no art left to be seen. The second law of thermodynamics dictates that in any closed system, energy naturally moves from a state of concentrated order to a state of diffuse chaos. Every sun, including the one that warms the Earth and the one that once powered the fallen world of Alpha Tango 58, is essentially a battery being drained. They are pockets of low entropy, brief anomalies of structure in an environment that favours the void. Every industrial process, every digital transmission, and every thought that flickers through a biological brain generates a small amount of waste heat. This heat is the tax that the universe extracts for the privilege of existence. It is energy that can never be recovered, a permanent contribution to the cooling background of space. In this context, a civilization is nothing more than a temporary localized reversal of entropy. We build cities, we organize information, and we construct megastructures to harvest the light of our stars, creating an island of complexity in a sea of disorder. But the law of thermodynamics ensures that the cost of maintaining this order is always higher than the order itself. To keep the lights on, a civilization must generate an ever-increasing amount of waste heat, accelerating the very decay it seeks to forestall. The technological shadow measured by the 3-eye atlas is the physical evidence of this struggle. It is the thermal signature of a species trying to outrun the second law, only to leave behind a lingering infrared glow as the final record of their failure. The universe does not care if the light being extinguished is the last hope of a billion souls or the random flicker of a dying nebula. It grinds forward with mechanical precision, dissolving every intricate structure into a uniform state of maximum disorder. This is the ultimate fate of the cosmos, often referred to as the heat death. In this final state, the temperature of the universe will be perfectly even, a fraction of a degree above absolute zero, and no more work can be performed. There will be no more stars to forge, no more planets to orbit, and no more minds to wonder at the silence. The gallery will be empty, the corridors will be cold, and the very concept of time will lose its meaning as there will be no changes left to measure. The 3-eye atlas is a collection of the cold letters written by those who preceded us into this inevitable dark. It is a ledger of civilizations that reached the limits of their energy and succumbed to the rising tide of entropy. We see the patterns of their decline in the cooling debris of their Dyson swarms and the fading chemical signatures of their atmospheres. They are the evidence that complexity is a fragile and fleeting state. The universe is not a home built for life. It is a furnace that is slowly running out of fuel, and we are the sparks that fly from the embers, bright for a microsecond before we are reclaimed by the ash. This realization strips away the romantic notions of a galactic destiny. There is no grand plan, no spiritual ascent, and no cosmic justice. There is only the relentless increase of entropy and the slow, steady cooling of the light. The silence of the stars is the silence of the machine, the sound of a system approaching equilibrium. When we look at the coordinates of Alpha Tango 58, we are seeing the second law in action. We are watching the transition from the structured energy of a Type 2 civilization to the chaotic infrared radiation of a debris field. It is a process that is repeated 1 billion times across the galaxy, a slow-motion dismantling of everything that intelligence has ever built. Yet, even in the face of this absolute indifference, the existence of the Atlas itself is a defiance of the law. To record the names of the dead, to map the locations of the fallen, and to read the thermal fingerprints of vanished worlds is to assert that order has a value, even if it is temporary. We are currently the ones holding the torch in the dark gallery, observing the lights as they go out. Our own civilization is an engine of entropy, a brief and beautiful rebellion against the cooling of the cosmos. We are writing our own letter to the future, knowing that the paper will eventually crumble and the ink will eventually fade into the background radiation. The tragedy of biological life is not that it ends, but that it occurs in a universe that will eventually forget it ever existed. We are the witnesses to the entropy of time, the ones who give a name to the cold and a voice to the silence, even as the machine continues its long, slow march toward the final, absolute dark. The weight of this realization descends upon the human spirit not as a crushing burden, but as a profound and singular responsibility. We are the current ink in the cosmic letter, the active hand moving across the parchment of the present moment. In this vast, indifferent machinery of spinning galaxies and collapsing stars, our struggles, our art, and our insatiable curiosity are the only things preventing the universe from being a meaningless clockwork of colliding atoms. Without a mind to perceive the light is merely a wave function. Without a heart to feel the cold is merely a lack of kinetic energy. We are the bridge between the raw data of existence and the lived experience of meaning. The shift in perspective that occurs at this threshold is transformative. We recognize that we are not merely passive observers of a finished story, but the protagonists of a narrative that is still being told. We are the ones currently speaking into the void, our radio waves expanding in a sphere of information that is now nearly 200 light-years in diameter. This sphere contains the music of our symphonies, the broadcasts of our wars, and the quiet whispers of our scientific discoveries. It is a fragile, luminous bubble of human thought drifting through a dark forest, and for this brief window of time, we are the only voice in the local quadrant of the galaxy. We are the ones who give the stars their names, transforming a nameless furnace of hydrogen and helium like Alpha Tango 58 into a symbol of our own aspirations and our own fears. To name a star is to perform an act of cosmic translation. It is to take a distant, inhuman phenomenon and bring it within the circle of human understanding. When we look at the constellations, we do not see random scatterings of ancient fire. We see the heroes, the monsters, and the myths of our ancestors. We project our own history onto the heavens, ensuring that even if the stars are indifferent to us, they carry the weight of our identity. This act of naming is the primary defense against the encroaching entropy of the dark. It is a claim of presence, a declaration that for a few thousand years, a species on a small blue world dared to look at the infinite and treat it as a neighbour. Being the observer of the silence is what gives that silence its definition. Silence is not simply the absence of sound, it is the expectation of a voice that never arrives. Without us to listen, the universe would not be silent, it would merely be mute. It is our presence at the telescope, our waiting for a signal, and our longing for connection that creates the tension of the great silence. We are the ones who define the gaps between the stars as a library of lost letters. We are the ones who look at the thermal shadows of the three-eye atlas and feel the pang of mourning for civilizations we never knew. In doing so, we extend the reach of our empathy across the light years, proving that the capacity for compassion is as fundamental to our nature as the capacity for observation. This weight of existence is most visible in the art we leave behind. A painting, a poem, or a gold-plated disc carrying the sounds of Earth is a desperate stroke of a brush against the canvas of extinction. It is a refusal to be forgotten by a universe that has a perfect memory for physics, but no memory for souls. Our art is the evidence that we were more than just a biological anomaly, or a temporary reversal of entropy. It is the proof that we felt the beauty of the light before it faded, and that we understood the tragedy of the dark before it claimed us. This creative impulse is the true shout of our species, a signal that transcends the limitations of radio waves and chemical pollutants. As we stand at the foothills of Stage 58, we are beginning to understand the gravity of our position. If the dark forest theory is correct, and if the Great Filter is as efficient as the Atlas suggests, then our survival is not a given. We are a flickering candle in a rising gale, and the flame is our own consciousness. Yet this fragility is exactly what makes our existence so precious. Because we are the only ones currently speaking, every word we utter carries the weight of the entire cosmos. We are the universe's way of reflecting upon itself, the sensory organs through which the galaxy experiences its own majesty and its own mortality. The realization that we might be alone in this particular moment of time does not diminish our value. It magnifies it. If we are the only letter currently being written, then we must ensure that the ink is bold and the message is clear. We must navigate the internal contradictions of our technology and the external dangers of the dark forest with a wisdom that matches our power. We are the curators of the present, the ones who must keep the fire of curiosity burning so that the next observer, millions of years from now, will find something in the atlas worth reading. We give the silence a name, we give the cold a voice, and for as long as we endure, we prevent the universe from being a lonely machine. We are the cosmic letter, and the story we choose to write is the only thing that truly matters in the face of the final, absolute dark. The cylinder of polished alloy continues its slow, rhythmic tumble through the void, a solitary punctuation mark in an infinite sentence. It carries the weight of 10 million years of silence, a testament to the fact that while civilizations are transient, the desire to be known is eternal. This journey through the Three-Eye Atlas has revealed a cosmos that is both more populated and more desolate than we once believed. It is a gallery of ghosts, a collection of thermal fingerprints and chemical scars left behind by those who dared to reach for the stars and found the reach exceeding their grasp. The irregular shadows of Alpha Tango 58 and the infrared glow of 1,000 other fallen worlds are not merely warnings. They are the previous chapters of a story that we are now tasked with continuing. We are the inheritors of this vast, silent archive, the only ones currently capable of turning the pages and reading the names of the departed. We are the universe's way of remembering itself. In the cold, unfeeling machinery of the stars, we are the only ones who can assign value to the light. The atoms that compose our bodies were forged in the hearts of suns that died billions of years before our own world was born, and now those same atoms have organized themselves into a form that can look back at the heavens and ask why. This is the supreme irony of the human condition. We are a brief and flickering moment in a cosmic timeline that spans 13.8 billion years, yet we are the only moment that possesses a memory. Without us, the history of the galaxy would be a series of physical events without a witness, a sequence of causes and effects that no one would ever feel or understand. With us, it becomes a saga of aspiration, a drama of discovery, and a letter addressed to the very heart of existence. The lessons of the Three-Eye Atlas are clear, etched into the fading light of every dying star we observe. We have seen how the great filter waits at stage 58, a wall made of the inherent instabilities of power and the unforgiving laws of thermodynamics. We have understood the logic of the dark forest, where the survival of the quietest is the only law that matters. We have felt the frustration of the cosmic speed limit, realizing that we are perpetually communicating with the past, reading messages from authors who have long since surrendered to the dark. These are the boundaries of our reality, the constraints within which we must write our own chapter. But these boundaries do not diminish the importance of our voice. They elevate it. If we are indeed the only ones currently speaking into the void, then every word we utter is a victory against the encroaching entropy. The responsibility that comes with this realization is absolute. We are currently the stewards of the only known intelligence in this corner of the spiral arm. We are the ones who must navigate the treacherous waters of our technological infancy, balancing our power to destroy with our capacity to create. We must ensure that our own technological shadow is not one of sudden violent heat, but a long and steady glow of a civilization that learned to live in harmony with the laws of the cosmos. We are the current guardians of the fire of curiosity, a flame that has been passed from world to world across the eons, often guttering and dying out before it could truly illuminate the dark. It is our task to keep this fire burning, not because we are guaranteed to find an answer or a companion, but because the act of looking is what prevents the universe from being a meaningless clockwork. As the light of our own sun continues to pour into the vacuum, carrying the spectral signatures of our industry and the radio echoes of our culture, we are writing our own letter to the future. We must ensure that this letter is one worth reading. We must fill it with the records of our art, the proofs of our mathematics, and the evidence of our compassion. We must show that we were a species that understood its own fragility, and yet chose to reach for the infinite anyway. We must prove that even in a universe governed by the second law of thermodynamics and the predatory silence of the dark forest, there was once a world where life dared to give the stars a name and the silence a definition. The three-eye atlas will continue to grow. New entries will be added as the telescopes of the future find the thermal ghosts of other worlds that reach for the light and fell, but for now, the pen is in our hands. We are the ones who give the universe a consciousness, even if only for a brief and flickering moment before our own light eventually fades. We are the witnesses to the majesty of the cosmos, the ones who transform the cold data of astronomy into the warm reality of experience. Let us write our story with the boldness of those who know they are being watched by the future. Let us ensure that when the next cylinder of polished alloy is found, drifting through the void 10 million years from now, it carries a message of a species that did not just survive, but truly understood what it meant to be the voice of the stars. The light is fading, the gallery is growing dark, but for this moment we are here, we are speaking, and the universe is listening to itself through us.